And it turns out that exchanging stories is a fantastic way to build rapport, and those are the connecting, the hook stories, I call them.
Welcome back to the Talking Sales series. I've got Mike Adams with me again. Mike, great to have you.
Thanks, John.
Last time Mike and I discussed why storytelling in sales is so important. And I'd like now, and you talked about the 7 types of stories we need to tell in the sales process. Yes. And I'd like now to talk about the first few in that. Now, you break the 7 down into 3 categories.
Correct.
One was what I'm calling engagement, connecting.
Connecting.
Right? Second one was what you were talking about, the fight.
Differentiating.
Right? And this is like the fishing analogy.
Yes.
So the hook in the first bit, the connecting, the fight, and then the landing of the fish. So you've got stories that associate for each one of those areas as we go through the sales process. Let's talk about the first area, connecting.
Connecting. Yes. There's we know that some salespeople connect easily with their clients and others don't, but we don't really know why very often. And most sales instruction is about all the questions you should ask, but not about how to be trusted to be able to get an honest and open answer to the questions. And that's about building rapport. And it turns out that exchanging stories is a fantastic way to build rapport. And those are the connecting, the hook stories, I call them, hook. So personal story, key staff story, which is a story about someone important in your organization that your client needs to trust in the sales engagement, and company story. Why does your company do what it does? Personal,
Key people and company.
That's it.
Can you give me some examples?
Yeah, well, I'll tell my personal story.
Okay.
So, I have different ways that I can tell the personal story, but I trained as an engineer. I didn't have any objective at all of being a salesperson or by a sales consultant. I was an electrical engineer. I was working in England in 1996. My boss called me into the office with, Mike, we've got a career opportunity for you.
Yeah, right.
Yes. We want you to go to Norway, good, and be a salesperson. And I really didn't like that idea. And what I said to him was, I can't go because my wife is 8 months pregnant. But when I went back home that night, it turned out my wife really wanted to go to Norway as well, and she flew 8 months pregnant. And that was my first sales role, and I was incredibly fortunate in that first job. I landed the biggest deal in our division worldwide because I was lucky, I think. I connected with someone who essentially sold the deal for me. But it was enough for me to think I can do this selling, and I enjoyed it, and I stayed selling. And then I ran sales teams in Russia and Europe, and when it was time to come back to Australia, we chose to live in Melbourne. I had no connections there. It's not an oil and gas town. I was selling oil and gas software.
Oil and gas, that's your history?
History was oil and gas software, yes. And so I needed to find a job in a different industry, and I landed a role in telecommunications, selling big ticket telecom equipment to big telecoms carriers. And I used to joke that I was perfectly qualified apart from not knowing anything about those 3 things at all. And then I had the experience of changing industry 3 more times after that. I worked in facility services, in industrial products, industrial equipment. And by the time I was kind of ready to come out of corporate and build a consulting company, I was interested in that problem of how do you quickly learn what to say when you're in a new selling environment? I think all of us
conduct the sales conversation.
What do you need to know when you don't know the industry, for example? What do you need to know? What are the pieces of information you need to know? And how to have those conversations, how to have and how to teach that to salespeople, because I've had sales teams, big sales teams, and routinely heard the issue of them not really saying the right thing, leading with their product too early. So we started teaching storytelling, and storytelling is rocket fuel for salespeople because they remember the stories, they remember the process, and they get much better very quickly. So that's how I personally got into what I do now. So you'll notice that my story has contained in it a bit of my career history and how I learnt to do what I do. It positions me as someone who knows what he's doing, but it also has something personal. I told you about my wife being pregnant, and the reason we put in that kind of personal and vulnerable thing, I was lucky, is we want to be able to say, John, enough about me. What about you? Why do you do? Why are you in procurement? How did you get to run this business? And what we put in our story is what will be seeded for them to put back. And we'll get that kind of story back, which is connecting.
Yeah, so you said at the beginning, sharing of stories is a really good way to connect. And you don't just want to tell your story. The real purpose is to get your client to tell their story.
We tell stories in order to get the customer's story. And that's how we learn about their situation as well.
Mike, there's one concern I've got here is right up front you're talking about yourself. And I've always taught salespeople, don't talk about yourself. Get the client talking about themselves.
Yeah, the issue with trying to get the client talking about themselves up front is, you want to ask these deep probing questions and they don't trust you. So they may answer your question, but you're not going to get a full and open answer because they don't know who you are. Mm-hmm. Who is this stranger in front of me?
Yeah, okay.
So there's a structural problem. Now, it takes some bravery to tell your story, and you're not just going to launch into it. You've still got an agenda for the meeting. We're here to talk about that. But then you're just going to say, I didn't even think I was going to be a salesperson, and this is how it happened.
And I was lucky,
and they will
so you're
listen.
showing your vulnerability.
They will listen because it's interesting, and people are interested in other people's stories, and they'll tell their stories. So in 10 minutes, you'll have exchanged stories, and then when you go to ask your question, they're telling someone they're already friendly with, and they start to trust. And there's a big difference between the types of answers you get to your typical sales questions when they trust you. Big difference, and it's really important. This is true rapport building.
So that's your personal story, and then in connecting, you're talking about key people.
Yes. So
and company.
That's right. So the story about other people that your new client needs to know and trust. Maybe it's your boss, your CEO, or the head of implementation, customer service, whoever they need to trust and who you need to hand over to after you've sold the deal. If you can tell their story, and you can certainly pump them up, but you need to know their story. You need to have taken the time to have found why they do what they do, tell it. If you do that, you will be priming your future client to trust your organization, and it will elevate your entire organization in their mind when they hear those stories.
Great point.
Really
Great
important.
Point. Yeah.
And then the company story. So most salespeople don't know their company story as a narrative, as a sequence of events. They might say we were founded in 1985, but then they'll say we're number one and we're in Sydney, Melbourne and Perth or wherever
and
you are.
that's not a story.
No, those are facts. Those are not stories. We have to have related events. We have to tell the story about how you succeeded.
So you're telling me there a story has a structure.
Story has a structure, which we'll cover in our next video.
Okay, I look forward to that very much.
Yes.
So the bottom line here is we're talking about the three connected stories.
Yes.
Your personal story, your key person story, and your company story, and you really need to know and be ready to communicate with your clients with those stories, and we understand the reason why.
Correct. And if you've taken the effort to practice those stories and put into them the right elements, you'll find that those first meetings become much more enjoyable. They'll be longer meetings, and you'll really exchange substantial information with your client.
Okay, engage more effectively and get more discovery, research type information coming in.
That's it.
Love it. Looking forward to this whole series. We'll do another 7 or 8 interviews. So Mike, thank you. Look forward to the next time.
Thanks very much, John.